Hi, I'm Scott Wolf, and I want to read to you from a transcript of a 1938 meeting at the Walt Disney Studios, where the staff discussed how they could have improved Snow White and what they can do to improve Pinocchio. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was Disney's first full-length animated movie, and what a masterpiece it was. Like Mickey Mouse, I just don't see how Disney could be what it is today had it not been for the success of Snow White. When I watch it today, over 90 years after it debuted, I still marvel at the beauty of every aspect of that film. And yet Dave Hand, who directed the movie, wasn't entirely pleased. What an incredible leap in quality Snow White was, compared to just 10 years earlier when Mickey Mouse made his debut in Steamboat Willie. And yet in 1938, Dave said, "I insist, although it may be a broad claim, that in 10 years our cartoons of today will look just as crude as those we made 8 or 9 years ago seem to us now." I definitely don't think Snow White looks as crude as those early Disney shorts, but I wonder if his views were influenced by Walt Disney, who always wished he could have gone back and improved things. In 1938, Dave conducted a meeting where he went over staging, and it ended up with a conversation about what they could have done to improve Snow White. This is remarkable to me because this is first-hand information, not just a summary in a modern book or a present-day person retelling what happened. These are the actual words from the actual staff. I'm going to read you some parts of this amazing document. But I also pulled out some of these old model sheets to show you while I read from the Story Department booklet. Model sheets were used to let the animators see exactly how a character should look, and from all different angles and with different expressions. Now, in this document, Dave says, "When the subject of staging was assigned to me, I thought I had a cinch. However, when I attempted to do some research, I found that nothing has been written about that particular subject. I could find absolutely nothing on it anywhere I looked. Since I could find nothing in books that would help me out, my approach to the subject becomes a matter of personal opinion." He talks about how all of them should be very conscious of transference of thought. Our entire medium is transference of thought. The thought is created first in the mind of the storyman or gagman, then transferred to the director who attempts to transfer it to an animator. This is where the big problem of transference comes, because the animator then attempts to transfer it pictorially. He takes it out of the intangible and places it in tangible form, in picture, for transference back to the mind of the audience. I feel that if we have a better understanding of the fundamentals of our medium, we are better able to spot stage our ideas. He then says there's an old Chinese saying that one picture is worth 10,000 words. I add to that, one picture properly staged is worth 10,000 words. The whole keynote of my talk will be on the clarity of the idea, the simplicity of the idea, and the directness of the idea. That is a part of the secret of our medium: clarity, simplicity, and directness. He talks about spot staging of an idea and says it has as its most important part the ability to direct the audience's eye to the place where the gag is being exposed at the proper time. He refers to a magician's book on how to stage things. He says, "I found the magician's technique to be one of misdirection, exactly the opposite of ours. I find it very interesting because our art is not to deceive the eye, but to be sure it's where we want it to be." Then it goes into a conversation with Dave and those in attendance. Unfortunately, it's hard to know who's saying what because it just reads Q and A rather than having people's names, and the Q's are not always questions. I think that the A is Dave Hand's answers to other people's comments. Nevertheless, this is a rare look into an actual conversation of a 1938 Disney staff. One question is, aren't we still afraid to come to very close close-ups? Recently, some sketches of Pinocchio, where the face filled the entire screen, were pointed out to me as being bad. The answer? The face begins to flatten out when you get too close on it. We're attempting to overcome that now with a new dye process, but it will be some time before it's perfected. What happens next is fascinating to me. They discuss what they could have done to improve Snow White, and he discusses the scene where Snow White appears to be dead. I think it's Dave who said one thing was the pie Snow White was making when the witch came. Might we not have used those uneaten pies as a touch in there to draw a little more of a tear from the audience? By a deep analysis of our situation, might we not convey the idea to the audience a little stronger, instead of this crude way of presenting Snow White dead and the dwarfs around her crying? Another rather obvious thing, could we have not recalled to the audience at that moment the touching prayer of, "Bless the 7 little men who have been so kind to me and make their dreams come true"? If we could have brought back to the minds of the audience at the beer scene the thought of that prayer, or the uneaten pies, I am confident that the sequence would have been much stronger from the standpoint of mood. By the way, he called it the beer scene. That's B-I-E-R. That's a platform that a corpse or a coffin lies on before burial. I didn't know that. A little later, he expands his idea. I suggest for the moment that we come in on this beer scene through the window with the camera instead of opening on the scene inside the house, as we did. As the camera comes through the window, we would see the uneaten pies. To see something a person was working on just before his death is very touching. From the shot of the uneaten pies, we would come on into the mood of the scene itself. We could do it in less footage if it were properly presented. We wouldn't have to show the dwarfs with tears coming out of their eyes. Another person in attendance suggested, "It seems to me a more touching thing is something like that that is unfinished, not quite completed. Suppose the pie on which the little bird was putting the word grumpy was not quite finished, and Doc reached over and put the letter Y where it belonged." Another person chimes in, "Had the bed building sequence remained in the picture, it would have been a touching thing to have shown Snow White on that bed. The dwarfs wanted to build it for her, then got it ready only in time for her death." Someone else states, "It would have been still stronger if they had worked to surprise her with something they made, and it were something that would be of absolutely no use when she was dead." Another person states, "The dwarfs had suggested making her a crown.
A crown! With precious jewels!
She had been treated so badly by the queen and denied the queenly raiment she should have had. If they had finished it just in time to put it on her head at the time they brought the flowers, it would have been very effective." Dave concludes, "If we had only built those touches into Snow White, we could have had a much better ending." The conversation suddenly jumps to Pinocchio, which was still in production at that time. One person states, "We're going to have another obvious scene in Pinocchio when Pinocchio is supposed to be drowned. We have cut down on the idea of the old man talking and crying. We will let silent grief take its place." And then another says, "Did it ever occur to anyone to have the old man be out? The fairy comes to Pinocchio to change him to a real boy, but he tells her if she has the power to give him life, to give it to Geppetto. Pinocchio is willing to make this sacrifice for Geppetto." To me, the weakness in our present story is that Pinocchio only justifies getting to be a real boy by trying to do something brave. Couldn't he sacrifice something that means a lot to him? And another says, when the fairy comes to give him life, he might say, "I don't want it now. Give it to my father." He gives up the one thing he has been striving for. Dave concludes this topic by saying, "We are all too apt, when sitting in story meetings, to listen to a suggestion and like or dislike it without analyzing our reasons for doing so. We should know why it is good or bad before accepting or rejecting it." Dave concludes, "We can spend our lives learning about it. I've merely hoped to give you something this evening to think about, so we can continue to go ahead in our work, developing ourselves for the future." I just feel like this is a time capsule of a very historic time in Disney history, and I hope you found it as fascinating as I do.